Hey guys, I am so excited to be doing a collab today about beefing up your social media presence as an author with fellow author tuber Meg Latour from iWriterly. In this video, I'll be interviewing Meg to get all of her tips about how to master Twitter for authors. And after you watch this video, you're definitely going to want to check out part 2 on Meg's channel, which I'll link below, which is where she is interviewing me about Instagram. Meg, I'm so excited to have you here on my channel to do this collab. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Thanks so much for having me today. As Brittany said, I'm Meg from iWriterly, a science fiction and fantasy writer and former literary agent. I'm also a developmental editor, and yeah, that's about it.
Meg is pretty awesome. So I'm so excited to get her insight and wisdom with Twitter because I am a mess over there. So let's get into our first question. Meg, how long have you been on Twitter, and what are the benefits you've seen of having a Twitter account for an author?
If any of you guys have watched my YouTube videos, I feel like I preach all the time about how wonderful Twitter is, but I have been on there, I would say, for a solid two and a half years. So I've been very active on Twitter. Prior to having my own account, I ran the Twitter accounts. I was the lead editor of a magazine, and so I ran their Twitter accounts, and we had up over 10,000 followers. I was doing Twitter for a while before I shifted gears into the writer world, and a writer friend of mine was like, "Hey, you should get on here. It's really good. It's really important." I was like, "Why?" And so when I did, I learned that Twitter is such a fantastic community, not just for writers connecting with other writers, but for writers who are really looking to learn the industry for like traditional publishing. All the literary agents and the editors and the publishers, they're all on Twitter for whatever reason. I know all of us, we like words, we like writing a lot of things, but let's go to a place where we can't write a lot of things. So a lot of them on there, and it's really good if you're looking to learn the industry.
Great. So is there anything else that you would say, like specifically to someone like me that's sort of timid about Twitter, or someone that hasn't started yet, like why should they join? Like what makes Twitter sort of stand out from like all the other platforms?
Compared to places like Facebook, personally, I have not really found a whole lot of success on there. So many writers are on Twitter. So if you're looking to build your author platform and writers and you want to teach things about writing, these writers are on Twitter because they want to learn from the literary agents or from the editors or the experts in the industry who are already on this platform. So even if you're not on Twitter to learn from these experts, personally, I feel like that is the number one thing that writers should do. Follow all the agents. Listen to what they say about the query box, the trends that they see, professionalism. Authors will tweet about their professionalism, but even besides that, this is where all of your peers are. So you can connect with your peers so easily and so readily. And there's just, last but certainly not least, there's a lot of Twitter pitch contests, which I know we'll get to later. But these are really great opportunities if you're looking to get traditionally published to get yourself in front of these industry professionals.
That's really great. And I'm so excited to talk about agents and Twitter chats and all that kind of stuff in a bit. But let's start with the basics. So what the heck should we be tweeting about? I got to ask a bunch of people on my Instagram what they would want to know, and that was like constantly coming up. Author Maverick and Lavera Books were wondering about the balance between self-promotion specifically and all the other kinds of posts that they should be doing. So what would you say, what should they be tweeting about? And when they're wondering like how much to balance those two things, what is the balance there?
Like any platform and really any industry, it's really important that you establish yourself as a thought leadership individual. So what do I mean by thought leadership? That is a term that a lot of journalisms and people in the technical field use just to say that they are an expert in what they do. So you want to share insider tips on maybe how to get book reviews. If you already have a published book, you want to share insider tips on how to write a book or how to do things that are valuable to your audience. So if your target audience is your fellow writers, then you want to create some type of thought leadership content on this platform. Promoting your book should really be a secondary thing or very minimalized. So you don't want to say, buy my book, or have pitched that one-liner again and again tweets every day throughout the week. That will get people to very quickly unfollow you. Instead, tweet out about how a challenge you experienced while writing your book. And then if people like whatever your advice is, they will then a lot of times look at your book authentically because they're like, I really like what this person has to say, and then they'll start looking at your book. So be excited, talk about your books, talk about your experience, but don't do so in a preachy or like promotional markety icky kind of way. You want to do so in a way that you establish yourself as an interesting person rather than pitching your product.
So I have a couple of follow-up questions for that. One being that, I feel like that's something that we hear on like every social media is to share like value, to share tips. And so when you're sharing some things already like on other platforms, we were wondering, how much should we be duplicating that stuff and just sort of sharing it like, hey, here's my YouTube video, or hey, here's something from Instagram, and how much should we be reimagining or thinking of like totally new content?
Personally, now this is just my take on the whole author platform thing, is I don't like to share too much of my stuff across, say, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too much. So if you look at when you post onto a Twitter timeline, your shape of your image is going to be different than Instagram. So if you're just taking the same picture and plopping it in both places, that just doesn't look super professional. But if you are going to talk about your experience, let's say, writing or editing a book, and you have a funny story that would do well on both Instagram and Twitter, you can do a condensed version on Twitter, a longer version on Instagram, associated with a picture, whatever. But I wouldn't just blankly post content across all of your platforms, if that is what you were asking.
Totally. And that's like something else that like someone specifically asked. And I do like a little bit of that, like reposting, but like you said, it's like you sort of reimagine or give like a different tip or something along with it. So does that sound like something that's okay to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sometimes like if I think of something and I'm like, oh, I really want to post this to Instagram, I will take maybe shorten it to like 2 lines and then share it on Twitter. But the thing is, Instagram and Twitter are very different. So Instagram is all about the aesthetics and the beauty, and then having some type of caption that engages your audience, as we kind of discussed in our previous video. But Twitter is really about kind of constantly being in your face. You want to have something interesting to share with someone many times throughout the day. So the ideal tweet quantity is about 15 plus times a day. So you want to be retweeting content, you want to be doing these individual your own original tweets, but you can also share links to videos, but you don't want to just be sharing links to your videos or auto sharing from Instagram to Twitter, because then people are like, well, I might as well just go follow them on those other platforms. Why should I follow them on Twitter?
So with that, do you have like a list of topics, or do you just go throughout your day and then things come to you that you're like, oh, I should tweet this?
I've been on Twitter for so long that a lot of times like I know at this point that a lot of my audience is on first thing in the morning, they're on kind of around lunchtime, and they're also on in the evening once they get home. It's good to try and kind of maybe have some type of theme across all of your social media platforms. So if one day I think I was talking about rejection as a writer on Instagram, then I did like a condensed version of that on Twitter. But I think for Twitter, the most important thing is being on the platform when people are there, not just scheduling your tweets and letting it go out into the universe. Just like Instagram, it's very important for people to be on Twitter, engaging with other people's tweets, and follow the experts in the industry, follow your peers that you maybe aspire to be similar to as far as your author platform sort of thing. Interact with their stuff and look at what they're doing when they're posting and interacting. And you also want to use threads, but we'll get to that later.
With that, we had a question from Nathalie Brundle Books on Instagram, and she was saying how it sort of feels to her like Twitter is a little more casual and relaxed compared to somewhere like Instagram. So she's wondering if it's good to show more of her personal side in addition to writing related things and book related things, and like how much of that do you share that's sort of unrelated?
My thought on this is going to be very different probably than other people's take, so this is my take. Personally, Twitter can be more relaxed than, say, like Instagram. You don't have to stage an image and use all the filters and you can just type out a couple of sentences and that's your tweet and you're engaging with people. But personally, the most interesting accounts that I like to follow, and that other people also like to follow, they're conveying humor, they're conveying interesting content where people are learning something valuable, and sometimes there's pictures and videos. That seems to be a minor thing. And then GIFs. But I feel like GIFs are GIFs, however people say it, that is most commonly used in the replies. Sometimes they're used in original tweets and stuff as well. But on Twitter, you want to treat it with professionalism like you would across all of your platforms. Give people a reason to come, express your kind of unique take on the world and your personality, but don't just be like, I feel tired today and so I'm not going to write. Instead say, make a joke about why you're tired. I don't have a good example at the moment, but convey your personality through professionalism.
Good. No, that's good to know about that like professional side, but still like you can joke and you can like, I guess it's more like being witty, right? Is that what you would say?
Snappy. Twitter is all about those snappy one-liners. So if you're good at those one-liners, come join us.
I love that. So you touched on this just a little bit, but I just want to expound on it for a second. That writer, Kimberly, also from Instagram, asked how often should she post? So if you say like a number, like of a certain number of tweets a day, and you mentioned briefly when to post is like a good idea. So is there a tactic that you use to figure out when you should be posting?
That is going to depend on your target audience. So for me, I write adult fiction and want to engage with the adults of the world. So a lot of times these adults, maybe they have a full-time job. So they're checking Twitter first thing in the morning when they get up, they're checking on lunch break, and they're checking in the evenings, with some people obviously going on throughout the day as well. So you think of when your target audience is on. Students might be on throughout the day because maybe they're college students, maybe they have classes on certain days at certain times. But there's also metrics. See when most of your engagements are, and then really capitalize on that. Like for example, Fridays are just fantastic for me as far as like engagements. But look at your own metrics and see kind of when most of the people are on. As far as that question you had asked about the quantity of times, I mentioned that before, about 15 or more tweets a day is what people say is the right thing. But I mean, when I was working at the literary agency, I was on Twitter all the time doing things like 10 queries and query tips and things like that. But now that I'm not working at the agency anymore, I probably get on Twitter and tweet like a couple of times each day. The key is consistency and being on there often.
So let's talk about hashtags a little bit. I personally feel like they haven't been helping me, or maybe I'm using the wrong one. So are there some that you would suggest to be using? Are there some new ones that maybe some people don't know about? I know like am writing is like the typical go-to, but what's your like hashtag strategy?
Hashtags on Twitter are not the same as Instagram. Instagram, you want to use as many as you can for the hope of being discovered. Twitter, the best way to use hashtags, in my opinion, is finding where communities often are. So the hashtags, the popular ones are am writing, am querying, am editing, or at least those are the ones that I most frequently use if I'm tweeting out like tips or something. There's things like writing tip or query tip, as well as 10 queries. That could be the number 10 or 10 spelled out, and those are usually literary agents will be tweeting out tips under those hashtags. There's also Ask Agent. Again, the same thing, that people will be tweeting out tips. But for writers who are just looking to tweet out their own original content and use hashtags effectively, honestly, I would look at where your peers are. One example of this is On the Porch. And people, it just was kind of like a community that was formed, and they use this hashtag and they all tweet out tips and they respond to each other, and then you can kind of see if there are more sub communities and stuff like that. But I think the key with Instagram with hashtags is to just find those community hashtags. The other thing that I would say is the hashtags for Twitter pitch contests. So not only do you want to actually pitch and do things in these Twitter pitch contests, you want to actually have your pitch, but follow the hashtags before and after the pitch happens. A lot of times you will get to interact with writers using that particular hashtag as well.
Loving all of these tips, Meg. Thanks so much. Let's talk a little bit about the profile. So how important is what's on your profile, the author username, the picture, and the bio, links, any of that? What should we be paying attention to?
All good questions. For me, again, I'm all about professionalism. I know some people like to kind of use Twitter kind of more relaxed and it's kind of less formal, but for me, I really highly value professionalism. So I think a professional headshot should be exactly what you put as your profile image. For your back header image, something that reflects your author branding, you can include things like your author website. I don't don't think that you have to, because that's going to be in your bio, but something that reflects your branding or your personality, that while still being professional. As far as your bio, give a quick snapshot of who you are and what you do, and then your personality. This is where you really want to bring out who you are and maybe some silliness. People will be like, I love cheese, or just kind of something silly like, writer of nonfiction, host of this hashtag or contest, and then they'll add something silly at the end. So feel free to be creative there. And then below that, I believe, is just your author website.
Awesome. Any other tips that we haven't talked about yet that you would suggest? I know you mentioned a little bit about threads and then maybe pinning comments.
Yes, so threads are really big right now for people that want to have a lot to say about a given topic and you don't have the space like you would on Instagram. So Twitter used to be 140 characters. It is now 280. While that seems like an infinite amount of space to use on Twitter, that's really not enough to cover a topic. So the authors, a lot of times that I see effectively using the thread, they'll start off with maybe say their experience in publishing. I think I saw one recently with Susan Dennard who was talking about how she was frustrated with like her book was not being sold in certain stores, and so she kind of talks about her experience about how you might appear as a successful author, and she obviously is very successful, but things like this happen. It's frustrating. You're not alone. And so she kind of went through this whole thread and using it effectively, and then she had all these people engaging with her saying, I went through it too, or I'm so sorry, or someone else might say, I just saw your book at my local bookstore, that kind of a thing. And so then you get this like community going on. So threads are really great if you have a long form topic. A lot of literary agents will do the same thing with threads. They'll talk about the business side, maybe the rights, the difficulties in selling manuscripts or negotiations, things like that. So a lot of times those long form discussions will be in threads. As far as pinning a comment, those I think most effectively are if you are trying to cross promote content across platforms. So if you have an AuthorTube channel and you have a video that you spend a lot of time on, it is your video of the month that you're really trying to promote, that you might pin up there for like a month and then swap it up. But I wouldn't leave it there indefinitely. Or if you have like a tweet about your manuscript and a lot of people were asking about it and it was a lot of fun, you can pin that at the top too.
Yeah, I know I have a video about my series Bible, but it also links to where you can get free templates, which links to my newsletter. So something like that would be good to sort of maybe, like you said, not keep there up indefinitely, but it like links people in to connect with me further. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, if you want someone beyond your author website at the top, some kind of call to action, that's a good place to put it, is in a pinned tweet. If you're like, oh, sign up for my newsletter, you get this free thing. If you just want to convey personality, if you're super new to Twitter and you made a really silly tweet and you want people to kind of get a feel for your personality, you could leave that up there as well.
And with threads, real quick, when you're doing a thread, is there any way that you should be sort of signaling to people that it is a thread, or do people see that automatically?
I know how you're supposed to do it. I never seem to do it right, but there's a couple ways you can go about that. Some people will literally say, insert topic, comma, a thread. So they might be like, the frustrations of the publishing industry, a thread, and on they go. So they can say a thread or thread at the beginning. You can also go, usually it's like one and then a slash and then a question mark, just to say, this is my first tweet of I don't know how many. Or if you have it planned, you can say this is my first tweet of 10. And then it indicates that it's a thread.
So one thing that I feel like I've had more success with people actually responding to my tweets or seeing them, possibly just because there's like a moving picture with them, is having GIFs. So I don't know if you find them helpful or not. So that maybe is like the first part of the question. But my second part is if you want to find like interesting GIFs, because I see people like finding really super creative ones that like work really well and that are just really witty. How do you go about finding really good ones? Because I feel like I find like the same ones all the time.
That's a good question. So I like GIFs or GIFs or however you say them. I think they're a lot of fun. Sometimes I'll use them on original tweets. Usually I try and find them and use them to convey personality. So if I'm typing something out and it's like putting a period at the end versus an exclamation point or a smiley face or an emoji, it's just to really convey what you're trying to say with a little bit more personality so that more people are wanting to engage with whatever it is that you're saying. So they're a lot of fun. I don't know that I've mastered like finding the super unique ones. A lot of times it'll be like, oh, I remember this guy did this thing thing in that show, and I thought that was really funny, and that would be applicable to this. I'll type in the show, I'll go and look for that thing, and then I'll find it. You can always type in something like excited or happy or sad face or something like that, and then that's where a lot of people use like a lot of the same just kind of GIFs. But I think, at least so far as I understand, a lot of people find these creative GIFs just because they are like, oh, I watched the show and there's that time and that thing would be really good here.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. The final question with just simply tweeting. This question comes from author Bethany Atazada, and she was saying she's having a little harder time, finding those like deeper connections on Twitter. Like they share witty things and they comment on each other's posts or they retweet, but there isn't like that deeper connection for some people like her. So what would you say for those people?
I think a lot of this is going to change and develop with time. So when I first hopped on Twitter, I would say it was a solid 6 months before I really started gaining traction on the platform. This is not the exact timeline. Everyone's going to be different, but a lot of this will come with time. That said, let's say you're interacting on a popular writer hashtag and you're tweeting out some stuff and you're trying to be like interact with people, but you just don't feel like you're connecting with people. Comment on their stuff. So if you find someone you think is really interesting, comment on their stuff. If there's someone says, oh, hey, I'm looking for critique partners or I want to do a sprint, reach out and say, hey, I'd be interested. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think as writers, a lot of times we're very timid, we're very nervous to kind of, say, hey, let's hang out, let's chat, or, let's exchange chapters. So I think the key for Twitter is just putting yourself out there.
Moving on to this talk about literary agents, because like you said, this is like a big reason and a big thing that sort of separates Twitter from all these other socials is that there are a ton of literary agents that are active on this platform. So my question from something you said earlier would be, how do you know which agents to follow and what are best practices for interacting with those agents?
For literary agents, honestly, what I did when I started out was I created a private list where I added any literary agent I could find. I dropped it into this private list. And then I would scan like the AAR website. I would look on the literary agency's website to see if these people actually were agents. And then I would start following them if they looked legit. And then I would follow a slew of agents. And then some of the agents would just tweet about politics, or maybe they tweet about the books that they sold or books that their agency has sold. And while that's really interesting, to me, I want the meat of the conversation. I want to learn about what are writers doing wrong in the query box? What are some of the challenges when you're selling rights to publishing houses? What is submission like? These were the meaty information that not all agents were sharing. So gradually you kind of weed out those people that are really sharing those insider tips. But that's when you follow hashtags like Ask Agent, what I said before, 10 queries, which could be TEN or the number 10. Query tip is another one, but I would look for the agents and then look for the hashtags. And a lot of times you'll just easily find the people that are most active on the platform.
Awesome. And do you actually engage with these agents and their tweets, or do you mostly just read them and like only engage with them when there's some kind of pitch contest? Is there any kind of protocol to that? Because you definitely don't want to like have a bad experience with a literary agent. So where should we tread lightly or where should we step out?
Personally, I think there's a time to interact with agents, whereas most of the time you probably just want to follow them. So I worked as a literary agent and I had a lot of writers ask me a lot of very personal questions about their manuscripts. I just didn't have time to answer. You have tons and tons of people asking you questions all the time. And while that's wonderful that these people are feeling brave enough to approach you, there just isn't the time in the day to do your job and then also to answer all these questions. So for me, if you want to interact with an agent, the best time to do that was when they're hosting an Ask Agent session. A lot of times they would, unannounced, they will just do it, and if you happen to be on, great, you can ask them questions then. If they're doing a thread or a series of tweets like the 10 queries where they talk about 10 different queries they saw that were good or bad or somewhere in between, and they talk about it, you can ask follow-up questions. I would wait until it looks like they're active on the platform and not just reply to anything. And you also want to be careful of what you ask. If you ask a bad question, which are usually like obvious questions that can be answered through going to the literary agent's website, how to submit properly, just go to the website and look it up. Other bad questions are things like, oh, what is a good word count for this? A lot of times you can just find those things online. But if you're like, oh, what is the fantasy market looking like right now? What are you having a hard time selling? That is like a good question because then the agent can share their insight, not something that you can easily find online.
That is all so valuable, Meg. So thank you for sharing that. Because I know, like, I've been a little like, oh, they're all on here. Oh, I shouldn't do anything bad. So thank you.
No, I mean, but you can definitely interact with them if they're tweeting stuff. They show a picture of their dog or their cat. You definitely can interact with them. But I found the most fruitful and meaningful relationships usually came during a time when they're like, okay, guys, I'm opening up the floodgates. Let's hear ya. You know, that's usually when I found that has been most productive.
Right. And that's why you want to like be on there and actively like following them or like looking at what's going on so that you don't miss opportunities like that. Right.
Exactly. Because a lot of times they won't announce things like an Ask Agent session that's not scheduled in advance. They'll be like, I have an hour. Go ahead. Ask me questions.
Perfect. All the things you can do when you're an agent. Great. Well, I have 2 more questions for you. The first being about Twitter chats. So there's a bunch of different kinds, but specifically, I guess the first part of this would be about Twitter chats that maybe other writers are hosting, because I know that I found some success in engaging with writers through ones that are hosted by other authors, other writers. Can you explain a little bit about what exactly a Twitter chat is, and if you have any experience with either hosting them or being a part of them in any way, so that if any of us would like to try to start our own Twitter chat, do you know any tips that we should be following?
Sure. So just a quick clarification, Twitter chats are different from the community hashtags that I was talking about. So On the Porch is an example of a community hashtag where people tweet at any time throughout the day, ask questions, they're looking for encouragement, maybe they query and they got a bunch of rejections, or maybe they're like, I found this amazing tip and I want to share it with you. These things happen anytime throughout the day. The Twitter chats are scheduled times, usually hosted by like an author or maybe like a publishing company or something like that, or an individual writer who isn't published yet. And it's a scheduled time where they will host a handful of questions.
Kim Chance, an author tuber, hosts Chance to Connect, and so a lot of times she'll ask a series of questions throughout maybe the course of an hour, and the whole point and purpose of so writers can interact with each other and obviously interact with the host of the Twitter chat. I have never hosted one of these. I know it's a really great way to connect with other people. For the most part, my experience with Twitter chats has been joining as a guest on there. So when I was a literary agent, I would join these Twitter chats and answer a bunch of questions. And usually it was a way, for example, for writers to learn about the industry, or maybe about writing the manuscript, or how to submit, or again, these are questions I probably could have learned online, but you know, it was a chance for them to ask a literary agent questions, any questions that they had over the course of an hour.
Awesome. So my last question is about Twitter contests like Pitch Wars and Pit Mad. And so I was wondering if you could just briefly explain what those kind of contests are, what the benefits are, and how we should engage in those.
If for no other reason, if writers are not interested in following literary agents to learn about advice and how the industry works and how to create the most interesting and unique manuscript in this current publishing marketplace, y'all should get on Twitter for the Twitter pitch contests. So I love these things, and I love them as an agent. I love them as a writer. They're a way to get your manuscript in front of agents' eyes in such a way that is kind of difficult in the query box. So on average, I think I received anywhere from like 15 to 50 queries a day, and maybe you couldn't check it every single day, and that quickly adds up to, you know, hundreds per week. Whereas if you're doing a Twitter pitch, you immediately get your pitch in front of a literary agent and they can heart it. And the process is once you heart it, then they'll tweet out, and usually pin this tweet, but they will tweet out their submission guidelines if they like it. So basically you go from being in the general query box to having, it's as though they ask for a partial request of your manuscript. Your submission will be prioritized a lot of times because it's competitive. Many agents will have asked for this thing and they will read it more quickly. So it's just kind of a way to speed up the process of what can be slow, because querying can take months or years before you gain interest or traction with an agent. So Twitter pitch contests are usually limited to the 280 characters. You have to include the pitch or the pitch contest hashtag, things like Pit Mad, and then you'll include your genre and category hashtags. So things like your genre would be fantasy, and then your category could be young adult. That way people, like the agents, could filter out the pitches that they're looking for. So if they only represent fantasy and young adult and adult, then they can filter their feed to see those pitches.
Great. Meg, this has been so helpful. I feel like I have an arsenal of things that I can actually use on Twitter. So thank you so much. And I also want to thank all the people that sent in questions because they were really valuable, you guys. And I hope that you all can come away with some more wisdom about Twitter, and we hope to see you there more often. Meg, thanks again so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, you guys are now definitely going to want to get the other half of this collab by going to Meg's channel and her video where she interviews me about Instagram. So that'll be linked below. And next week, probably on Thursday at some point in the evening, we are going to be having a live stream where I interview yet another author. This one is my friend Rachel, but she's going to be coming on here and helping me talk about critique partners. So if you guys have any questions about critique partners, definitely leave those questions in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and this interview style collab, definitely let me know that by giving this video a like and saying so in the comments, along with any other Twitter questions you have, as I'm sure I could always ask Meg for any other insights. And you guys, until next week, happy writing.